Okay, I think it's working. It's working. Okay. So could I just get your full names and where you guys were born?
Yeah, so my name is Craig, Craig Barnette, and I was born in Pompano, well, technically Fort Lauderdale, Florida.
Okay.
And my name is Dewin, Dewin Barnette, and I was born in Orange Park, Florida.
Okay. So we do have, I don't know if you saw it, but we have this whole list of pandemic oral history project questions. And I want to ask you some of them, but because I'm a musician myself, I would like to talk about that mostly.
Sure.
But we can start with just the generic pandemic questions. So can you tell me about the first time you heard about COVID-19? What was your reaction to that?
First time I heard was from him. It was probably the second week of March. My daughter was on spring break and we decided to take an overnight trip, and he loaded us up with hand sanitizer. I don't watch the news myself, so I get everything from him. And that's the first time I remember is going on that trip. And every time we got in and out of the car, anywhere we went, we used hand sanitizer.
And I think I heard about it before then. I can't remember exactly when it was. I mean, I remember hearing about it existing, the virus being in overseas in China, probably back in, I would say, early January. And then I definitely remember really starting to get serious about it here about that same time that she said that I told her, because I had I was doing some shows down in Daytona during Bike Week, and I was kind of like, that was like right when it really started to get serious here, and they were talking about shutdowns, and I think things had gotten really ugly in New York. And I was kind of freaked out being down there in the middle of Bike Week, where nobody seemed to be concerned with it at all at that point. And in fact, I kind of remember coming back from it being like, if I didn't get it, this week in Bike Week, then I'm probably not going to get it all.
Yeah. Yeah, a few of my friends went to Disney like a week before shutdown, and they're like, we didn't get it then, we won't get it now. But yeah. I don't think that's true. So I want to ask you about, since you're a musician and you rely on a gig economy, how do you think the government has been supporting you through the pandemic?
I mean, as far as gig workers go, and in particular the entertainment industry, I would say not particularly well. It's been different state to state. Here in Florida, the unemployment situation was a complete nightmare. There's kind of, I guess, twofold to this. One is that there's like I don't know if you're aware of it, but there's a huge movement to get behind, and I'm sorry to say I can't remember the name of it, but there's a bill they're trying to get passed right now to help kind of the entertainment, the live, gig worker, like the people who do like show support, crew, musicians, artists, like performing arts, all that type of thing. And supporting the venues, the independently owned venues, which are just absolutely being crushed right now. The places that are owned by like Live Nation and some of the larger kind of corporate entertainment groups are, they're going to be able to weather this a lot better. But, some of the small locally owned venues, which are a staple to the whole music industry, are just, they're closing by the day. Mm-hmm. But to the unemployment thing, I mean, here in Florida, the way the unemployment system is set up in Florida is, prior to the pandemic, you can't, if you're self-employed, in other words, if your income is basically 1099, you're an independent contractor, you're not paid via W-2, like a normal payroll thing, you do not qualify for unemployment generally. So, rewind to a year ago, had I lost all my gigs, due to some unforeseen circumstances, I would not be able to go and claim unemployment. That's just the way it's always been. They've always had it here. There's no support and it's not just musicians, it's anybody who's paid that way. So you could be, you could be a carpenter, but if you are an independent contractor and you're just, getting paid as such, you probably would have a hard time getting unemployment too. So right off the bat, this whole thing was just a complete nightmare for us, because for me to claim any benefits, including the federal benefits, you had to go through that state portal. And right off the bat, because I was self-employed, it was just, I was kicked out, because that's just the way the system was set up. So overall, just, I would say that the government, at the federal level for sure, kind of bungled this thing for people like me. States, again, it varies state to state. I've got some of my friends who live in other states who are musicians, had no problem. Like a good friend of mine lives in Colorado, and he was able to claim unemployment from day one and get the full thing, and it was no problem. So.
I'm so sorry to hear that.
I mean, it is what it is. It's obviously not your fault. So, but thank you.
It's Florida. Huh.
Exactly.
So, Dewin, are you also a musician?
No, I'm a stay-at-home mom. I homeschool our daughter. We have a 6-year-old daughter.
Okay. So I should ask about that too. But so Craig, sorry, sorry to jump back and forth. What instruments do you play, and what styles do you play usually?
So I play drums. I have a music degree, a jazz performance degree.
Oh, from where?
From University of North Florida here in Jackson.
Oh, that's a really good program. Okay.
So, but I don't, my joke I tell people is I had to get a jazz degree to become a better rock drummer. I play jazz once in a while and I still enjoy it, but I just don't play it nearly as much as I did when I was in college and the first few years out of college. So now I mostly do rock and funk, pop music. I do session work, studio recording stuff. I've done stuff for Disney, independent artists. The band that I tour with primarily is kind of like a Southern soul funk band, kind of like Otis Redding, Marvin Gaye, and James Brown meet Leonard Skinner in like a back alley brawl kind of.
That's awesome.
I guess that's kind of how I put it.
So do you think certain kinds of music have suffered more during this pandemic? So like, you see church musicians still getting gigs every Sunday because churches didn't really close.
Yeah.
So do you see how certain styles of music going forward might be affected by this pandemic?
I don't know if it's necessarily styles. I think it has more to do with like the demographics of like the musicians as far as how invested they are into the business of music and the gig economy. So like to your point about churches, I have a lot of friends and I've played in a lot of churches. Some of my friends didn't, because the churches here didn't necessarily all close, but some of them did, and some of them closed to the public, but were doing like virtual services, in which case they were still hiring the musicians to come in and play. I had another good friend who the church was completely dark for like the first month or two, and they still kept them on their regular payroll, which was really awesome. But that wasn't the case across the board. So there was definitely some church musicians who definitely felt the impact of it. Going forward, I think they'll be fine. Certainly, and most churches are opening back up if they haven't all already opened back up. But again, I feel like, if you're an established, really well-known artist, I'm talking about like if you're, Taylor Swift, or if you're, maybe not even that big, like, I don't know, I can't think of any examples right now, but they're obviously going to weather the storm a lot better. Presumably they have, better resources and savings and stuff like that. And, when you're a mainstream artist, it's easier to reach your fans just in general because you're all over streaming and stuff like that. But I think the musicians who are really going to struggle long term, and some bands may have already folded because of this, is just the groups that rely on touring to get, they're kind of up and coming bands or mid-level bands that aren't like a household name, and they still rely on live performances as the bulk of their income, and also as, you know, the primary way they're building their fan base. So, and again, I don't think it's a specific style. I think it just has to do more with those demographics of like, are you, you know, an up and coming new group, or are you kind of already have a foothold in the industry? And like, you know, the band that I tour with, our fan base isn't going away. This is just kind of a pause for us. And as soon as things open back up, we'll be able to hit it, and everything will be back pretty much probably to normal, if not better in some respects. Because I think
oh, sorry. I was just going to ask why you thought it was better, but I think you were going to say that.
Yeah, I mean, I just mean that because the you know, the thirst for live music, and the band that I tour with, we typically do on average about 100 shows a year here in the States. So this is the longest break they've ever had, period, since the band started. I mean, I've been back with them for, it'll be 5 years this fall, but they've been touring nonstop pretty much since the early 2000s. So this is the longest break they've pretty much ever had. And, you know, with no end in sight, it's probably going to be early next year before we really get back at it at best. So the fans are going to be like, you know, I think it's going to be not a problem selling out shows. So that's just what I mean by being better, at least in the short term, you know, and then things may kind of balance back out. But I think, and not, you know, again, not just for us, I think for all bands in that position, they'll have that kind of like, when they get back at it, their fans are going to be ready to go. So they'll have good attendance and people coming out to support them.
Yeah, I think people are starting to realize how much, or are starting to appreciate how much we need live music. So I hope for the best.
Yeah, for sure.
So speaking of live music, have you tried live streaming? Have you experienced that during the pandemic?
Yeah, I've done a couple of those. We did one here with a group that I play with a couple of friends of mine locally. We ended up doing it from this venue here that we play. They brought in a guy who set up, you know, equipment, and we you know, performed and streamed it out. And then I did another one for a friend of mine in England for this kind of virtual festival they had that's a fundraiser for like their first responders over there in Cornwall in the UK. But those are the only two. Oh, sorry, I did the other one. I did a driveway thing a couple times with some other friends. The live stream thing is cool, but it's, to me, I see it as kind of a novelty in the sense that, like, again, I feel like if you're a huge artist, like say Dave Matthews, and you're going to go in once a week and just sit in front of the camera with an acoustic guitar and do kind of like a little living room set, you're going to have a much easier time drawing a repeat crowd, you know, online to come see you, because first of all, it's an intimate moment that you don't often get with an artist like that. And then plus they have such a vast catalog of songs, you know, they can do 4 or 5 different live streams and not play the same song twice. And then the third part of it too is, you know, oftentimes you don't see a lot of Dave Matthews playing solo acoustic. It's usually with his full band or maybe like a duo. So that's another kind of thing where there's a draw there. But then again, for bands that are, you know, maybe local bands or local artists that are used to normally playing in bars and restaurants and stuff like that, which a lot of my friends here have been doing the live stream thing. You probably, like, it just seems like the first couple times you do it, you might get a pretty decent response and you might get some tips, but then it kind of starts to fall off after there because just the interest kind of sort of wanes, I think. So, and the other part of it too is like right when this whole thing started and immediately there was this huge surge of like, let's do a live, you know, like let's do a Zoom concert or whatever. It seemed like when I go on my Facebook or Instagram, it was like everybody was live streaming at the same time. So it was just like oversaturation of stuff. And so that was, at least for me and a couple of my friends here, we were just kind of like, if we're going to do it, let's do it once or twice. But we just didn't want to turn into like every day or like a couple times a week or even every week, you know, like time for our live stream, because it just felt like it was just gonna, I don't know, kind of just felt like there was just too much of that going on, and we just didn't feel like we could like really contribute something that people would really want to come sit there in front of their computer or in front of their TV and watch, you know. And some music translates better over like this.
Mm-hmm.
So, some music, you lose that connection just through the virtual thing.
Yeah, and you also need recording equipment, tech.
Yeah.
That.
If you're a solo guitar and a singer, you can get away with, you know, probably just sitting in front of your computer or your iPhone or your iPad or whatever, your tablet, maybe with just one microphone, and it's going to sound fine. But if you're talking about full band with drums and keys and, you know, maybe horns and stuff, if you try and do that with just one microphone, it's going to sound like garbage.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. That makes sense.
Yeah.
So what are some other things that musicians are doing to get through the pandemic? Like, are you teaching? Just anything like that?
Yeah. Most everybody I know for the most part is doing some sort of online lessons.
Okay.
Some of us have gone back to teaching in-person lessons as well, at least on a limited basis. And then aside from that, I mean, I've got friends who are taking jobs with, like, you know, DoorDash and Uber Eats and Instacart and just delivering food and groceries. Another good friend of mine took up bartending. You know, he had bartended before. So he had the experience, so he took up a job bartending. So yeah, I mean, it's just, everybody's just kind of scrambling to do whatever they can, really.
That's true. Are you teaching lessons?
Yeah.
Okay. And you're doing them virtually or in person?
I'm doing both. I've got 2 students here in Jacksonville that I had taught from before, who I've transitioned back to in-person lessons with. And then I've got, you know, some students that I acquired after this started who live in other parts of the country who we do virtual lessons. So
how have you been doing virtual lessons?
Just via either Facebook or Skype. FaceTime or Skype.
FaceTime or Skype. You don't have issues with phasing or?
Yeah, there's some latency issues sometimes. It just depends. Like, a couple of my students have, their internet is not as great, or like, you know, maybe they're up in their bedroom and the Wi-Fi connection isn't as great. And so sometimes it gets a little funky, but we make it work. You just kind of have to deal with it.
And do you have any insight into how, I guess, are your students high school or college aged?
They run the gamut from like middle school up through adult.
Oh, okay.
So I've got one girl I teach who's an adult. I've got a couple kids in high school, a couple kids in middle school. So yeah, kind of.
Do you have any insight into how young musicians who are still, I mean, we all need lessons, but who really need lessons right now, do you have any insight into how they are handling the pandemic, especially as a musician?
I would say that even just going back to prior to the pandemic, like the era we live in with just kind of this virtual era we're in with YouTube and, you know, social media. I mean, I think back to when I started playing drums when I was 11, 12, and even through high school and even into college. If I wanted to learn a song, I had to get the record and sit there and listen to it over and over. Mm-hmm. If I was lucky, maybe there was like a live concert video of it I could watch, but that was it. So it really was like a lot more of an investment as far as like you had to really, really go out and want to learn the song. And it was more difficult because, you know, you didn't have the visual. You had to completely rely on your ears to figure out what was going on until, you know, later on, as my reading got better, sight reading and music got better, I could find some books that had some of the music, and then I could kind of read it. But now, I mean, you could go on YouTube, like look up a song and go on YouTube, and there's probably 10 different drum tutorial videos that people have recorded of them breaking it down and playing the different parts and in slow motion. And, you know, so it's definitely the best time in history to be alive as a young musician and stuck at home during a pandemic, if that makes sense.
Hey, yeah.
You know, it's not like you're stuck inside and you can't, you know, like, oh man, I can't go to the music store and get that new record today. It's like, you just wake up and turn on your phone and it's right there.
That's kind of nice. I mean, I don't know if their parents who also are stuck at home would enjoy
Right.
it, but that's a really good point. I didn't think about that. Let's see. So I have some questions for Dewin, and we can hop back and forth, but I want to hear about how you've been homeschooling.
So we have been homeschooling parents since day one. We knew that's what we were going to do, so it was not a decision we made based on COVID. But I'm very thankful that we didn't have to worry about that decision like many people have. We actually are proponents of alternative education. So what we do is technically called unschooling, meaning we don't follow a set curriculum. We don't do tests. We don't do grades. We just fix the curriculum according to our daughter's needs at that particular moment in time, which can change from day to day. I have a degree from the University of Rhode Island in child development, and I've taught in public and private schools. I was a reading specialist for several years before I quit to stay home with her. Mm-hmm. So I'm lucky that I had some experience that I can pull from. So it's been fun. We did have her in a play school 2 days a week for socialization the last 3 years. And so she lost out on the last 3 months of that because of COVID. But now we're just, you know, strictly at home doing the unschooling. And we did start a homeschool co-op 1 day a week a few weeks ago, which I was a little nervous about because it was right after he had gotten sick and I wasn't sure if we were going to be able to go, but we go, we wear masks, and that's it.
Wait, sick with what?
I'm sorry?
Sick with what?
So with the COVID.
Yeah.
What?
Newsflash.
I didn't know you got it. What was that like?
I was in the hospital for a week. Yeah. Yeah, it was good times. It was awesome. I highly recommend. I left a great review on Yelp for COVID-19. Awesome. No, it sucked. It sucked.
It still sucks.
It still sucks. Yeah, I got sick the very beginning of July, and I was home. I had basically nonstop fever for almost 12 days straight.
Oh my God.
And the chest congestion, and, you know, a few of the other minor symptoms. And I fought it here at home for the better part of 2.5 weeks. I went to the ER once, and they took chest x-rays and, you know, confirmed it was COVID and that I had the pneumonia, but, you know, they were like, you're not bad enough for us to admit you. So they just sent me home with some drugs.
Oh.
A couple days went by and I thought I was kind of had turned the corner, but then a couple more days went by and it got really, really bad as far as like as soon as I got sick, I knew what the complications of COVID could be. So I got a hold of a pulse oximeter so I could watch my oxygen levels. And they just dropped one day. Like I woke up and just kind of felt extra worse and out of it. And my oxygen levels were in like the mid to high 70s, which is really, really bad. And they had been pretty consistently in like the low 90s. Sometimes they'd drop into the high 80s, but then kind of come back up. But yeah, so long story short, that day we were like, you know, I need to go back to the hospital. So we actually ended up calling 911. The ambulance came, and by the time I got into the ambulance, my oxygen had dropped to like 68, I think. It was like something like that. So long story short, I ended up having blood clots. They call them the COVID clots. It's one of the complications. You just develop blood clots, and I had one in my leg and another one had gone into my lung. So I had a pulmonary embolism. So yeah, so that on top of the pneumonia.
Oh my God.
Yeah. Good times.
Yeah. So I didn't know that could happen. The blood clots, at least.
Yeah. It's apparently it's a pretty common complication from it in the more severe cases. And like I said, they kind of call them the COVID clots. And I don't know the science behind exactly what causes it. I just know it's one of the common things. And I had no pre-existing history of having any kind of blood clotting.
Yeah.
So I spent a week in the hospital and came home, and then the 2.5 weeks that I was back after the hospital were really rough, because that's when the coughing fits really started, because at that point, my body was trying to get the stuff out of my lungs. And I went into the hospital on the 16th of July and I was discharged on the 23rd. So here we are. It's September 10th?
It's been about a month and a half.
So it's been about a month and a half since I've been out, and I still, I'd say I'm probably 95% back to normal. But I still can feel like a little bit of tightness in my chest and lungs at times. And if I really, if I tried to go out and strenuously exercise or do a bunch of really, yard work or something, I would really feel it. I'd get winded pretty easily.
Do you know of any singers or wind musicians that have gotten COVID?
I know a couple vocalists who have gotten it and a couple of horn players who have gotten it, but they never got really severe. They didn't, like I did. They just either tested positive for it and then, were asymptomatic, or they just had really mild symptoms. So, but I do know a couple, particularly brass players who were really freaked out, particularly after I got it so bad, and they realized how bad, I was struggling, with my lungs and stuff. That really freaked them out.
Yeah, so, I understand. It's not just a health thing; it's your livelihood.
Right. Exactly.
So speaking about how, at least I don't know a lot about the coronavirus, apparently. Do you think that we're getting the full story of how the virus is affecting people, or how it's affecting or infecting people?
I don't, it's hard to say. I don't think that there's a coordinated effort to misinform the public. Mm-hmm. I just think that the whole thing has been kind of bungled from the start, just across the board, and politicized by everybody under the sun on both sides of the aisle. And I just think that it's just turned into this giant mess of misinformation mixed with real information. And I think that it makes it really hard for people to kind of filter through all that and come out with the truth, so to speak.
Yeah.
Like I said, I don't think there's some dark force behind a curtain somewhere. We're going to get these people with this COVID. I think it's just, it's just turned into a misinformation nightmare.
Sounds about right. Yeah. You said you don't watch the news. Is that because of this and the faulty news coverage, or was it prior to this?
It was prior to this. I've never been a big, cable news, or, I'd watch the local news once in a while, but I just predominantly get my information and my news sources from just various outlets online and Twitter. I know Twitter is technically social media, but I feel like Twitter is a little bit more, what's the word I'm looking for? It's a little bit better for getting the actual news from than Facebook or Instagram. I just feel like Twitter is more about things that are breaking, real-time events. And obviously you still have to filter and be careful, because there's still a lot of one-sided people on Twitter who are trying to push an agenda, just like everything else. But yeah, I just kind of the cable news just started to come off the rails, I think, back during probably the early parts of, actually going back probably as far as into the last Bush presidency. Mm-hmm. Was when things really started to kind of turn into a circus. And then that just kind of escalated through the Obama presidency. And then now it's it's
insanity.
Yeah.
Your insanity?
Yeah, basically. So yeah, I tend, and I'll still every once in a while, I'll check out I might go to CNN if there's like something big happening. I might just go there to see what they're saying about it, but I definitely don't, some people just wake up and they put on CNN, or they wake up and put on Fox or whatever. And I'm not either of those people. So.
I forgot my question. I'm sorry about that. So just tell me about your daily life during the pandemic. Like, what do you do during the day to keep yourself occupied? I'm sure you practice or you play drums at some point. How do you entertain your daughter? Do you go out ever? What do you do outside to entertain yourselves? Just tell me about your daily lives.
Let me take it. Luckily, my daughter and I are both very similar in that we prefer to stay home. We don't like big crowds. So it's really been easy with her, and I'm thankful that we just have her. So she hasn't had any problems. The first, I'd say, month, we didn't leave the house much at all. And then we started filtering in play dates. We'd go see her friends outside at the beach or something like that. Mm-hmm. And now, obviously when he was sick, Story and I, that's my daughter's Story, we stayed home for the better part of a month because we didn't know if we had it. I tested negative. Story, we tried to do the test on her, but she couldn't handle the Q-tip up her nose. So we're not sure if she ever had it. But the doctors all say I most likely did. So she's been easy. As far as keeping ourselves busy, that's a really good question. I think I've reorganized our pantry about 5 times.
There's this thing called Netflix. It's really cool. I don't know. I've rewatched a couple series from start to finish twice, at least.
Which ones?
What's that?
Which ones?
The Office, West Wing. We just most recently got into Cobra Kai, and we just finished the 2nd season of that last night. I don't know. I don't
know what we do, but we're not big TV people. So honestly, I don't think we watch TV as much as other people. When it was cooler out in the spring, we spent a lot of time in the backyard. We're lucky that we have a yard. So that was nice to get out. My daughter and I have been raising monarch butterflies, so that definitely keeps us busy. Basically just trying to keep the house up and like you said, keep ourselves busy. So I do a lot of research as well. So, I've been doing a lot of studying.
And like for me, as things have progressed through the pandemic, like my best friend lives just a couple miles away. And so like it got to a point where we kind of felt comfortable hanging out. And we wanted to kind of integrate because he's got 2 children and his daughter is really good friends with our daughter. So okay. When we felt like it was kind of safe, we kind of integrated our families together so that they could at least, like, we could hang out and the kids could play and stuff like that. So, we've just been kind of taking it a day at a time and, just trying to weather the storm, for lack of a better cliche.
Do you live close to UNF or?
Yeah, we live right up the road from it. It's about 4 miles south of us.
Okay. So have students returned to UNF?
I think so. I honestly haven't been keeping up real close with that. But I think they have. But I'm not sure what, guidelines and regulations and things they have in place. So.
Yeah. So I wanted to ask how Jacksonville in particular has been dealing with the virus, because it's different in every Florida county.
Yeah, literally. It's interesting when things really first started kind of hitting the wall back in like March and April, and people started they started publishing the numbers, and you could go online and see like county by county what the infection rates look like. Mm-hmm. Duval County, which is Jacksonville encompasses the entire county of Duval. Our numbers stayed really low comparatively to most of the rest of the state as far as for the big cities. And I think a big part of that was just because the population here is pretty big, but it's super spread out because it's such a big city, geographically speaking. So it's not like Miami, Dade or Broward counties, or even, or Orlando or Tampa, where you've got large populations and they're living a little bit closer together. Mm-hmm. So I think that really helped us in terms of kind of like keeping our numbers low at first. But unfortunately, we're, without, turning this into a political thing, Duval County is it's a pretty red county. So it's, for the most part, it tends to vote Republican. Our mayor is Republican. Obviously the governor's Republican. So it was they were kind of taking cues from Washington. So we were a little bit late to the game as far as like a mask ordinance. And I think if that had started earlier, it might have helped things here a little bit better. We did shut down quite a bit. I guess that was in April, in May. And then we started reopening kind of sort of when a lot of the other cities did. And, from that point on, that was like, I think mid-June, something like that. And that was when the numbers just overall really started to go through the ceiling, like across the state. And so then it picked up here. I mean, we were still, I think I never saw like what we peaked at. I haven't looked at the numbers in a while, but I think we were, relatively speaking, still lower than, Dade or Broward, just because we have less people living here. But I know that our hospitals, I started watching when I got sick, I started kind of watching the hospital capacities because I was like worried, like, okay, if I get really bad and have to go in, I want to make sure there's a hospital that's got room for me. Mm-hmm. And I don't know that any of our hospitals ever hit capacity, but I know they got pretty close a couple times.
My mom's friend was sent home.
Yeah, that's right.
From a hospital.
Yeah.
And they gave her treatments to take at home, and she's in her 70s.
She was very high risk, yeah. And I guess they sent her home because they didn't have a spot for her. And when I went to the hospital, I had no problem getting in, aside from just having to wait a few hours for them to get a bed for me. But I mean, I think that's just normal. So, I mean, anyway, to your question, I think the city did okay with it, but I think it had more to do with just the way the city is population density wise, and less to do with how it was actually managed by the local government,
So it was like luck instead of
basically, yeah.
planning.
Yeah. Had this been like, if we'd have had the population of, say, Orlando or Tampa, I think it would have been pretty ugly up here.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think the media and Washington, as you said, they've been using people like you to make these claims that we should open early. The economy is more important, just because a lot of workers need public spaces in order to make money. How do you feel about that?
I mean, I'm mixed. I have mixed emotions about it. I mean, I understand the need that, obviously the economy overall is important. I know I would like to be able to go back to work because A, it's what I love and I miss doing it.
Yeah.
But B, we also, we need to pay the mortgage. But, and again, this goes back to, like I've kind of said, we've talked about it and I've said, had this been managed differently from the very beginning, we probably could have avoided shutdowns altogether. If this had been really taken seriously and properly handled, and not just kind of, oh, well, we'll let the states decide what they want to do and what they think is right. I mean, I just feel like we could have just maybe had a couple months of, some unusual and maybe uncomfortable things we had to deal with as far as the social distancing and wearing masks, and maybe closing down some super non-essential things temporarily. But I think it could have gone a completely different way. And we wouldn't have this issue now of so many people being unemployed and, Congress having to potentially spend another, billions more dollars trying to send people money and stuff like that. So I don't know. It's tough to say. I definitely think that at the end of the day, human life is definitely much more important. And, we've talked about it also, and it's just, this whole thing has kind of shed a light on how quick people are to kind of discount other people's lives.
Yeah.
Just the mask debate. It's like, it's like okay, the mask might not be 100% effective. Maybe it's not effective at all, but we don't know that right now. But what we do know is that it's not going to hurt you to wear the thing. Just wear the mask. Like, if it turns out that it didn't do anything, no harm, no foul. But
Yep.
if it works even a little bit and like one person doesn't get sick or one person doesn't die, then it's totally worth it. I mean, it's just be courteous, you know?
Yeah. So there's another question on the list that I'm going to ask based on that. What has this global pandemic shown us about the state of humanity in general, like how we treat each other?
I'm gonna let you take this one.
Okay.
Yeah, we talk about this a lot. I mean, I think the biggest thing to me is that it should be showing us all how interconnected we are.
Okay.
I think that specifically as Americans, we suffer from this delusion of separateness from each other. And I just think that, you know, if there's anything good to come out of this situation, that it would be that we realize we all need each other, that some of our most essential workers are the most underpaid, unappreciated, you know, disrespected people. And I think that's what we should be getting from this. I don't know that people are focusing on that. But yeah, I mean, that's what we talk about a lot.
Yeah. Have you seen people treat essential workers better now, or has it been about the same?
I'd say about the same. I mean, fortunately, at least I haven't been, you know, I haven't witnessed in person anybody being mean or like, you know, yelling at somebody because they have to wear a mask or any of that stuff that's kind of been happening in some places. But at the same time, I don't know that I've actually seen anybody go out of their way to be extra nice to people. I would say it's probably about the same.
Okay.
You know, but also bear in mind that like we're not going out to restaurants to eat.
Yeah, we don't leave the house much. So.
We pretty much, it's like that experience is limited to like the grocery store, and
Yeah.
I've gone to like Home Depot I think once. You know? So
Have you been embarking on any home improvement projects during the pandemic?
no, not really. I mean, just the normal maintenance stuff. Unfortunately, we don't, you know, like we don't have the income, the extra money right now to do anything that we'd like to do. It's all been repurposed to keeping the lights on. So
Yeah, some yard work.
Yeah.
Because that's free. But we actually were getting ready to sell this house literally the second week of March. I had cleaned it from top to bottom. I had packed half of our things. We were going to put it on the market, and then this happened. And so we've kind of been in this state of limbo. So, I mean, it took probably the first month where I thought, oh, this is just going to be a couple weeks and then it'll be back to normal. And then I realized a month in, that's not going to happen. So I had to go back and unpack stuff. I had just packed. So now we're in the horrible position of trying to decide, do we put our house on the market now? Do we wait until next year? So that added another layer of, you know.
Fun and excitement.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So we haven't, to answer your question, we haven't done any improvements because we don't know if we're staying here, basically.
Have you seen, like, what have you noticed in the housing market?
Our house,
It's definitely a seller's market for sure.
our worth has gone up.
Oh,
We
it's a
did.
seller's market.
Yeah, we recently spoke with a real estate agent, and you know, he was talking in terms of inventory, meaning like, you know, how many houses do they have for sale over a period of months, and it's like really low inventory, at least here in Jacksonville. I mean, I don't know how it is elsewhere, but houses come up on the market and then they sell within weeks, if not days. So I mean,
That's good.
it's definitely a seller's market. Our house is, you know, kind of looks like it could be worth maybe about 10,000 more than it was about this time last year, you know, but again, that's one of the things that's such an uncertainty, is like, who knows what's going to happen with the election and after the election and how that's going to impact the economy.
Yeah.
So it's like, you know, that's one of the things where like, do we sell now or do we wait? And if we wait, you know, could the market fall out? Like, it's just, you know, it's just craziness.
Yeah, it really is. Well, I wish you all luck in selling your house if you are going to choose to do that.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Wow. Yeah. Are you worried about COVID at all if you sell your house and buy a new one, or do you think it should be okay?
You mean in terms of like
having people come over? Yeah.
I mean, not really. I mean, I think a lot of the real estate agencies seem to be limiting their showings to people who are like pre-qualified, like pre-approved for mortgages. So they're really kind of thinning the herd. They're not just showing the house to anybody. And I mean, it's not like we're going to be here and I'm not worried about, I mean, I've had it. It doesn't mean I'm not going to get it again, but I just I feel like statistically speaking, for me to get it a second time would be pretty crazy. And Dewin and Story were, I mean, when I was homesick with it, we weren't really isolating from one another. I mean, we were still sharing the same bed. I mean, which of course some people kind of like looked at us funny for, but at that point in time, we were just, her mentality was kind of like, the hell with it. If I'm going to get it, I'm going to get it. Let me get it and get it over with kind of thing. Plus just the way our house is laid out, it would have been really hard for me to like stay in one room and not come out and not interact with them. So long story short, they had to have been exposed to it from me.
Yeah.
And I really don't, I mean, again, it's not to say they couldn't still get sick from it, but I just feel like we're at a point where, I don't want to go out to a crowded bar and like stand this close to somebody's face and talk to them without a mask, or with a mask for that matter. But I mean, we're also not going to hide under our bed, and if we decide to sell, I mean, we really don't have any reason to interact face to face with potential buyers. We wouldn't be home if they were coming to see it. And I'm not worried about somebody coming into the house and sneezing and then we're all going to get sick. I mean,
That's good. Dewin, what were your symptoms of COVID then?
I didn't have any. So he had it. We think he was exposed 5 days before he showed symptoms.
Oh, when did that, where did that happen then?
Yeah.
So I went and played. I hadn't played any shows or anything.
Oh, I see.
Basically from like mid-March. We did like a couple of live stream things. But things started to open up back here in Florida. And one of the things I do when I'm not on tour is I do a lot of wedding work.
Mm-hmm. Not a wedding? Okay.
So the last 2 weekends of June, I had 2 weddings. And I also actually played 2 different church services those 2 weekends also.
Okay.
So my thinking is that I caught it at one of those. The first wedding was like kind of a mid-sized wedding, but nobody was really wearing masks and it was indoors. The second wedding was a huge wedding, like 400 guests, and it was indoors and nobody was wearing masks. I mean, we were trying to wear masks in the band as much as we could. I wore my mask, I kind of started to wear it on stage, but it was just kind of difficult to play with it on.
Mm.
So my thinking is I may have gotten it at one of those weddings, or more likely that second wedding. But also the band that I played with was like a 10-piece band and nobody else got sick with it. So I may have picked it up somewhere completely. I could have, at that point it was everywhere. So, I mean, I could have picked it up at the grocery store. I could have picked it up who knows? So, yeah. But that was like the end of June and my symptoms first started on, I think, the 2nd of July. So.
Yeah,
Okay.
so that's why I didn't bother quarantining myself from him, because we had already been together for 5 days. So I figured I've already been exposed and I'm not going to take care of my husband.
And the first 2 or 3 days that I was started to get sick, I honestly didn't think it was COVID. I thought it was something totally else. So that was another reason why we were like, I'm like, well, this isn't COVID. This is whatever.
But I never had symptoms. Story never had symptoms. I didn't get tested until, I want to say it was the 15th. He had it already for 3 weeks, just because I wasn't even thinking about getting tested. I was thinking about him. So I think I might have waited too long to get tested. So mine was negative. I don't know, but all his doctors at Mayo Clinic said that I definitely had it. So.
Did you get the antibody test?
I did. It was also negative.
What?
Yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, I guess there's a chance I didn't get it. I just don't know how. So.
That's interesting.
Yeah. But I also have a O positive blood type, which they say is less likely to catch it. At least that's what they're saying right now. Really?
Yeah.
Oh, good.
Party.
So yeah, hopefully we won't get it.
We can hang out.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I wouldn't expect a couple who lives together to have such widely different symptoms.
Yeah, I read it. I heard like early on, I listened to a lot of like NPR and stuff like that. And I remember hearing a couple of stories of people who had it in New York City and who were living in apartments, and like couples who both got it and were just like, I'm so thankful we both didn't have it at the same time. I mean, I'm thankful that she and my daughter didn't have it at all, but I'm really thankful that we didn't have it at the same time, because I can't imagine like not having somebody to like try and help you through that. Cause you know, like it's pretty gnarly.
It's debilitating. Yeah, that's what it seems like. Well, I'm glad you got better.
Thanks. Me too.
And I hope you continue to get better, since you said it's 95% there. So questions for both of you, respectively. How do you think the pandemic is going to change the trajectory of the music industry? And how do you think it's going to change education?
Well, I'll take the music industry question. It's hard to say, obviously, long term. I'd like to think that we're eventually going to get back to where we were before the pandemic in terms of like not having to worry about socially distanced shows and stuff like that. But honestly, I think short term, and I mean short term being the next couple of years, we're definitely going to see when shows do start to really happen again. I mean, obviously right now there's people doing like the drive-through shows, and some others. I think there's been a couple other like socially distanced things like outdoor shows, but I really think we're going to still see reduced capacities, and that's going to really impact both the promoters and the artists, because there's just not going to be as much revenue generated. Either that, or they're going to have to really crank ticket prices up to compensate for the lesser capacity, which then that's going to, hurt the fans. So the other issue too that a friend of mine mentioned is just liability issues, which is there's going to be, venues have to have insurance, liability insurance, and this is unprecedented. And I think a lot of insurance companies aren't going to they're not going to want these venues just opening up and having concerts just for the sake of the fact that somebody might get sick and try and sue them, So that's a big kind of unknown how that's going to play out. So yeah, it's still, and it's almost a running joke at this point. Like since March, we've constantly been like, well, we'll know more in a month, or like, we'll have a better idea in a month. And like literally now it's like 6 months, and we're still like, well, we'll see what it's like next month. We'll probably know better what it's going to look like. It's just the goalpost keeps moving. So, I mean, who knows? I mean, it could be, my hope right now, my sincerest hope is that with schools opening back up, so far, knock on wood nearby. This is like 4 months.
I'll do it for you.
Thank you.
My hope is that, it doesn't seem like there's been any real huge blooms of infection with the schools open. I mean, I know some schools have had isolated things and shut down temporarily and stuff, but my hope is that things kind of stay steady. And then maybe it'll just kind of, I think the big variable now is, at least in Florida, is once they let bars open again, if people are smart about it and don't just completely run out and turn it into like crazy party time, hopefully we'll kind of keep the numbers steady through the end of the year, and then it'll be a little easier to get things kind of back on track in, next year. But, we'll see what happens.
Okay.
And education.
Yeah, I don't know. I do think that our schools here have been doing a good job. I know of 3 or 4 schools that have had incidents where, somebody contracted the illness, and so they were able to easily figure out who that child had been in contact with and keep them home for 2 weeks. I think they're doing a good job of staying on top of it. And like you said, I hope they keep that up. As far as down the road, I honestly hope that none of these things have to be kept in place as far as face masks and screens. Long term, I can't even imagine what that's like And again, I'm just thankful that we don't have to worry about that with our daughter. At her homeschool co-op, people are allowed to wear masks or not wear masks. It's not a mandate, but we wear masks when we're in large groups. What I hope will happen is that parents, although you hear in the media how hard it's been for them to homeschool their kids over the past 6 months, I'm hoping that some parents were empowered. Obviously, I'm a proponent of homeschooling, so I'm hoping, although I haven't looked into it, that the number of homeschoolers have increased. And I'm just hoping it gives parents more confidence to know that they can teach their children, that it is possible, because I'd like to see more of that. And of course, with this virtual classes, virtual Zoom meetings and everything. I think because we were forced to take part in them, I think before a lot of people might have been hesitant to try them, but now that we've all kind of had to, hopefully parents will see that it's possible, again, to do things at home, that their child doesn't have to go to school to get a good education. I mean, that's my hope.
Well, and also too, there's the distinct possibility that hopefully some companies will see the benefit in potentially allowing employees just to work from home, work remotely, which would then in turn allow them to be home and potentially, maybe they don't have to clock out or clock in 9 to 5 every day, and they can work from home for the time they need, and then have time also to potentially homeschool their kid, or at least be home with their children instead of having to put them in daycare or something,
Yeah, that's a really good point.
So
yeah, and also online businesses, people who are doing these either creating their own online business or doing courses online. I think that's also increased over the pandemic. Trying to think of the name of the website, but I can't remember it. But there's several now, I'm sure, that you can get on there and you can make a course and you can sell it to people. And I think it's just been a bit of an empowering experience. Again, if we can take anything good from it, for people to know, yes, I have something that I can give and knowledge that I can provide, because everybody does. And I really hope that that community sense, again, talking about how people are more interconnected than they realize, I'm hoping that will take off too, and more people can do things online. So that they can focus more on their families and things that are important. So.
Yeah, so you would say that the pandemic is empowering individuals to teach themselves and to teach others online.
Correct, yeah.
It's a good point. I like that. You're really good at finding the positives in this. So it's been an hour. I don't know if you have more time than this, but I wanted to make sure I asked you this question before you leave. How do you feel about taking a vaccine, or not vaccines in general, but the fact that this vaccine has been rushed? How do you feel about that?
I can say unequivocally, I will not be putting any vaccine in my body that comes out in the next 6 months.
Okay.
I'm not a big proponent. Like, I've been vaccinated. I'm not an anti-vaxxer by any means, but things like I've never gotten a flu shot in my life. And now I'm probably going to have to get my first one, just because my doctors really strongly said, because, my immune system is still probably a little bit on vacation from the COVID infection. So they're like, it's probably a really good idea that you get the flu shot this year, just to kind of help so you don't pick something up. But, even then, the flu shot is never completely effective anyway. So I don't know, but I'm probably still going to end up getting it. But yeah, I mean, I definitely, this whole concept of it was said from the get-go, like, vaccines take a long time to make them, test them, prove them safe and effective. And, all of a sudden now it's like, oh no, we got this. It's only been 6 months, but no, it's going to be ready next week. I'm like, yeah, no, you guys have fun with that. And, when you sprout a third eye and like a fourth ear, enjoy that.
That makes sense. Do you feel that generally, I guess I don't want to ask any leading questions, but do you feel that we're just being a little impatient to get the economy on the move and it's causing the misinformation, or do you think it's coming from somewhere else?
I mean, I don't think it's just the economy. I think it's just the overall, I think everybody has serious pandemic fatigue. I think everybody's over it in general, and they want to get back to the way it was, or at least as close as we can. and they're tired of having to deal with all of it from the top down, you know, every aspect of it. But on the same note, I also think that a big part of the push with the vaccine is definitely politically driven.
Mm-hmm.
And obviously, depending on, you know, what side of the aisle you tend to sit on, you know, it seems like both sides have their own theory on like why the virus is going to magically disappear come election, after the election, you know, which I think is probably not exactly accurate. But we'll see what happens. But yeah, I mean, I don't know. I don't know that it's necessarily, definitely the economy is certainly part of it. But I think it's just overall, just people are just over it. I know we are, like.
Yeah. So I wanted to ask you about your mental health during this time. I know everyone, like, a lot of us need physical contact with our friends. A lot of us can't really, I mean, I personally don't like not be able to hug my friends. It makes me really sad. But on top of the mental health issues that we can assume we'll have due to social distancing and isolation, do you think not being able to play music live with a band has affected your mental health?
I mean, yeah, I mean, certainly it's been, I've been playing drums. I've been playing music since I was, like I said, I think, you know, 11 or 12. And not that I initially started playing with people right away, but I was at least in school band starting in 7th grade.
Mm-hmm.
And from then on, I mean, I was at least in band playing with people, if not in playing music for a living, you know. So this is the longest I've gone with, I mean, you know, I've played a couple shows. I actually just played a wedding last weekend. But it's, yeah, I mean, in this period of time, like I could count on almost one hand the number of like times I've played music with other people.
Yeah.
It's really weird. It's very bizarre. And I'm sure to some extent, I mean, it's not even just that, it's just the whole overall thing of not being able to go do what I do. And, you know, the social, I'm a very social person, not being able to go and just hang out with people. And like you said, like I'm a hugger. So like, not, you know, you go to see somebody and you're like, hey, oh, sorry.
Yeah.
You know,
Air hug.
that awkward thing. And like, yeah, I mean, that's certainly affecting me and everybody, you know. You know, and we have our days where it's like, I'll wake up and I'm just in a fog, you know. But
Yeah.
again, it's the whole thing. It's not just certain aspects of it. It's just the whole thing just sucks.
Yeah. I don't know if you met Dr. Berkner here at UF, but he was like, I haven't played or I haven't conducted an ensemble in months, and I turned into an angry old man.
Yeah.
So I was wondering if you felt, maybe you didn't get angry like Dr. Berkner did, but maybe you felt the effects of not being able to play music as you always had.
You know, definitely, for sure. I mean, it's definitely a bummer. Like I miss that experience, and I miss, you know, making music with my friends and, you know, performing for people and seeing people be happy because of something I'm doing and having a good time. Yeah, I mean, it definitely is a bummer, but thankfully there's whiskey. So that gets me by most days.
Well, I hope you get to return to performing as soon as you can.
It'll happen. It's just going to be, you know, it just might be, I don't know. We'll know more in another month.
We'll know more by 2021.
Yeah. Exactly.
So do you guys have any other comments about the pandemic you'd like to share? Just how you've been getting through the day? Anything else?
I don't know. I can't think of anything off the top of my head.
Anything to say about your hospital experience?
Yeah, I would like to hear more about that.
Hospital experience. I would say first and foremost, everybody I dealt with, and I happened to go to a Mayo hospital here in Jacksonville, and everybody I dealt with there was amazing.
Okay.
All of the staff, everybody was, you know, like I immediately had that glimpse into like, man, like these men and women are doing this day in and day out and putting themselves at risk. And, some of them you could like the stress that they had about it was almost visceral, but then there were others who almost seemed to kind of not be too concerned about it. But, but everybody was awesome. I definitely felt like, I got like the best care I could have given the situation. But yeah, I mean, I showed up to the hospital, to the ER the second time when the ambulance took me. My oxygen was really bad, like I said, and they put me on initially on like one of those conventional oxygen masks. That's like, it's the mask with the bag on it. I think they call it like a rebreather. And this was the other thing too, was this was a whole eye-opening experience to me, like learning things that I had no clue about. Like just, you assume when you're like, oh, put them on oxygen, like they hook the hose up and you're getting oxygen. But I really learned about like flow rates and saturation rates and all this different stuff. So like normally when, like, as we're sitting here today, we're breathing like, what is it, like 20% oxygen or something?
30, yeah.
30, something between 20 and 30% oxygen in the air. The rest of it is like nitrogen and other stuff. So when you go into the hospital and they put you on oxygen, like the normal oxygen they give you, the flow rate is something like they can go up to like, I forget how many liters. I think it's liters per hour.
Mm-hmm.
And then I'm not entirely sure what the saturation is of that oxygen. I know it's not 100%. It's like, probably like 80% or something like that. So they originally had me on that, but then that wasn't keeping my numbers up. So they had to then they switched me to a different kind of mask. And then that wasn't working. So by this time they had admitted me and I was in my own room and out of the ER. And they were like, we're going to put you on this high flow thing. And the high flow thing looks like, it almost looks kind of like, it's like a regular nasal cannula where it's got the two things that go up your nose. Mm-hmm. But instead of it being a little thin, clear plastic tube, it's like this big hose that goes around your head. It almost looks like a scuba apparatus type thing. And it goes through a machine that's blowing, like pushing air. So they were like, at one point I was on something like, I think it was like, was it 80-60 or something like that? Was it 80? I think it was an 80%.
I can tell you.
Yeah, she kept like a whole journal of everything.
It's like notes and notes to occupy myself while he was in the hospital.
That's a really important historical document. I hope you know that.
I got a whole folder here full of stuff.
You should definitely keep that.
Yeah, I will. It's crazy, but yeah, 80-60 sounds about right.
I think it was like 80% oxygen.
Oh, here, 80-40.
80-40?
Yep.
Yeah, I mean, it was like 40 liters an hour at 80% saturation to keep my levels in the 90s.
Wow.
And it was the kind of thing where it's almost like a ventilator, but it's, instead of having a tube going down your throat, it's just going through your nose. But it was really weird sensation because you just constantly have air blowing up your nose. So even if I wasn't like taking a breath, there was still air being kind of almost pushed in. And it wasn't so bad when I was awake, but it was really tough to sleep with because it's just such a weird sensation. And long story short, they were basically like, if this doesn't keep your oxygen up, there's like one more thing we can try. But if that doesn't work, then it's intubation. So I was like, at that point, it was kind of like, oh crap,
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I mean, it just, the first day I was there, they found that I had the blood clots, and then fortunately the one in my lung was small enough. They didn't have to go in and remove it. They just were able to give me blood thinner by IV to dissolve it. And they gave me a antiviral drug that Mayo was running a trial on. It was called anakinra.
Mm.
And that was an injection I got twice a day. And a couple of other things like that. They put me on a steroid that was to help with the inflammation in the lungs. And then regular antibiotics, just not so much because the antibiotics don't really work with viruses, but just to help fight against any sort of other systemic infection that you might pick up in a hospital.
Yeah.
So yeah, but I mean, after this third day or so, I started to things started to improve, I think. And then eventually they weaned me off of the high flow and back onto like a regular oxygen system. And then, it definitely got frustrating by like the 5th, 6th day. I was ready to get the heck out of there,
And how long were you there for? You were there for a week, right?
7 full days. Yeah.
Did you have to pay out of pocket for that?
So fortunately, the way it went down was before I went to the emergency room the first time, like we picked Mayo because it's the closest hospital to us. And it's Mayo. They have a great reputation. So Dewin called, we have insurance, we have health insurance. But we have it's a pretty low, it's a bronze tier ACA. I don't know how familiar you are with the Affordable Care Act.
Not very.
Yeah. So it's basically if you get your insurance through the ACA, it's you pick either bronze, silver, or gold tier. And there may even be a platinum. We originally started out with a silver, but the premiums have just been going up and up steadily. So we had to drop it down to like a bronze package just so we could afford the premiums, which, it's coverage, but it's basically it's kind of like, oh crap coverage. Like if something like this happens. So long story short, Dewin called Mayo and was like, hey, if I bring my husband in there to the ER, does our insurance cover it? And they're like, oh yeah, it'll be taken care of. We're like, all right, cool. So we didn't think twice about me going back there the second time. Well, as it turns out, and we found this out after they admitted me, the ER visits are covered, but as far as Mayo admitting me, it was out of network for us. And the caseworker called her and was like, hey, we're out of network with your insurance. But the doctors were like, I was too critical to transfer to a different hospital. So I was stuck there. So when I got out of the hospital, we were freaking out because we were like, if our insurance doesn't pay for this, we have no way of paying for this. And the hospital bills ended up being just north of probably between, I'd say 70 and 75,000.
But with everything else, because we had to pay for his PCP visits after the hospital.
Yeah, there's been some other
oxygen. In total, it was probably $85,000.
Yeah, something like that. It was, it was a lot of money, and we were like, it was like a daily, several times a day, checking our insurance website and the Mayo portal just to see if anything had come through. And very happy to say that our insurance basically has so far covered almost, I would say 95% or more of it all.
That's good.
Yeah. So that part at least was the silver lining of it all, because that would have sunk us. There would have been no way we could have paid that.
It's really unfortunate that while you're sick, you had to think about this.
He was in the hospital. I had to send his iPad through a friend of a friend because I couldn't leave the house because we didn't know if I had it. Nobody's allowed on the COVID floor, nobody. My friend who's a doctor at Mayo couldn't even push the button on the elevator. They had it locked down good.
Wow.
But I sent the iPad through a friend of a friend to him so that he could get on it in the hospital bed to try and do the unemployment.
Yeah, I was
website.
in the hospital bed trying to still sort through my unemployment, trying to get unemployment payments. So yeah, not to pivot back to that conversation, but the unemployment thing was just a nightmare.
Yeah, that's awful. I wish America was better at taking care of its people.
Yeah, me too.
But I'm really glad it was covered with your insurance. It's really good.
Yeah.
How do you think insurance and our coverage of medical bills, do you think anything is going to change after the pandemic?
Well, I'm sure our premiums are going to go through the roof. And I don't mean just us. I would imagine it seems like the general thing from what I've seen is that, and this is good, at least short term, is that most insurances have been really good about covering COVID care, particularly virtual doctor's visits and stuff like that, they tend to be, I know, like with ours, I'm pretty sure they cover 100% of virtual stuff.
Okay.
So again, this is one of those things where going forward, we may see more when you need to go get just a checkup or you've got just a minor bug, instead of actually having to go to a physical doctor's office, you might be able to just log on and schedule a virtual appointment, you know, and consult with a doctor. And that could be something that helps keep costs down, at least for primary care.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, it's tough to say with insurance because they've obviously had to pay out a lot of money in a short period of time. So who knows what's going to happen. But my guess, being a little bit cynical, is that we're going to see across the board probably another pretty stiff premium increase, which has been the trend anyway with, you know, just because we can't seem to come together on any sort of universal health care or, you know, social health care. So
that's what I was going to ask. Has getting COVID changed your view of universal health care, or?
I've always been a proponent of it.
Okay.
You know, maybe not just blindly. I mean, I think there at least should be a government option. I think some type of universal coverage with the option of some kind of privately provided, you know, amended coverage that people can opt for if they want, I think is a good thing to look at. I definitely think our medical industry here just is completely screwy. And just how things get billed. And I mean, you know, I know everything is expensive, and I know that, like, you know, I like, just when I was in the hospital for 7 days, just my pharmacy bill, the portion of my bill that was just related to the drugs that I had, which again, it was blood thinners, the antiviral, and well, that's the antiviral, you know, the steroid, and then just the antibiotics. It was almost $11,000.
Yeah.
And I mean, that's kind of crazy. I'm like, you know, again, I realize that there's a lot of research. When you develop a drug, there's tons of money that goes into the research and the testing and the, you know, but then at some point it's like, it's almost like they need to use like the model that the record companies used to use, where it's like, you'd sign a record deal and the record company would dump a bunch of money into you and produce your album, but then you wouldn't see a lot of return until the record company recouped their investment. And then when they recouped their investment, they started to profit share with the artists. It's like, kind of, they need to, you know, a drug company comes out with a new drug. Maybe they spend $10 million developing it. But if it's a drug that goes into wide use, they're going to recoup that money after a while. And then, you know, maybe at that point they can look at, you know, it's almost free money at that point coming to them, you know, aside from the production of it and the distribution. But, you know, that's where it would be a good time to, like, maybe rethink the cost of it overall, you know. And again, without any sort of government mandate on that, it just comes down to the will of the corporation to do that.
And they're not going to.
Right.
It's for profit. They're not
exactly.
going to.
I always also, the example I like to use too with that whole thing is, like, back after September 11th happened and the airlines were just, you know, in the gutters, and then fuel prices skyrocketed. All the airlines started adding these fuel surcharges because they're like, you know, well, we've got to charge we've got to charge you this extra $50 because gas is so expensive. Well, fuel prices are at like record lows now, but guess what's still getting charged? It's not like they came back and were like, oh, well, we're going to stop charging you this now because we're not going to do baggage fees anymore, because once those increases happen and the general public is used to them, they're always going to stay in place.
Yep.
And the same goes for health insurance. Like, people like to argue that the reason the health premiums have gone up so much is because of the Affordable Care Act, and how, you know, all these insurance companies have, you know, had their expenses go up because now they've got to provide coverage for the uninsured or blah, 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 or whatever. And I'm like, and they'll say, you know, if we did away with the ACA, then our premiums would come back down. I'm like, premiums aren't going to come back down. Like, we've been paying them for how many years now? Like, those insurance companies aren't going to all of a sudden just give up, you know, billions of dollars in premiums just because it's the right thing to do.
Yeah.
So I know that's the cynical way to look at it, but
No, it's probably the best way, the most reasonable way to look at it, I think. Yeah, well, I'm just really glad you didn't get saddled with all that debt.
yeah, no, we're very thankful for that for sure.
Yeah, and I think, you know, a lot of people don't even have the 10,000 you were charged for the pharmaceuticals. A lot of people don't even have that in their savings.
Oh, yeah.
So, well, I mean, it's interesting that you got firsthand knowledge with the virus. I didn't know that you actually got COVID. But thank you so much for sharing your experience with that.
Yeah, no worries.
I'm sure that was very difficult while you were going through it.
I told Dewin at one point, you know, like I mentioned, after I got out of the hospital, I started having these coughing fits. And honestly, it was like when the thing first started, the fever, I was like, you know, I've had fevers before in my life when I've gotten sick, but it's usually just a day or two. And I literally, I mean, it was like 12 days of relentless fever. And if I took meds like Tylenol and ibuprofen, which I was basically alternating nonstop,
Wow.
as much as I safely could, it would keep the fever, you know, around 100. But if I stopped taking those meds, it would spike to like 103.
Oh my gosh.
So it was miserable. And I was like, this is the worst thing ever. And then I was in the hospital and I'm like, this is the worst thing ever. And then I got out of the hospital and then the coughing fit started. And I'm like, oh my God, this is really the worst thing ever.
Really?
So I was like, I missed a great opportunity in that I hindsight being 2020, I should have been filming myself having these coughing fits and put out a YouTube video and just been like, wear your mask. And then just like, this is why, you know?
Yeah.
It was ugly, like ugly coughing.
Do you think if the mainstream media put out videos like that of like the real symptoms of coronavirus, do you think it would actually help people stay inside, wear masks?
If the mainstream media did it, I don't know, because I think, again, right now, the mainstream media, quote unquote, is pretty radioactive. So like anything they do, it's like, you know,
It's fake.
it's fake or it's got an agenda or something. But I think if real people put stuff out, you know, like using social media or YouTube or stuff like that, and really documented themselves without touching that kind of electrified rail of the mainstream media or any, you know, organized media, I think that might have a better hand. I mean, certainly you see some stories people share, the testimonials that get shared around Facebook and social media. But I think a lot of that has just been like text and maybe like a picture of somebody in their hospital room or something like that. But I think like videos of what people are going through, I think that kind of thing would be more helpful. But yeah, unfortunately, I think media is just so tainted right now, that anything they do, you know, it's like, if Fox puts it out, then one side's going to be saying, oh, that's just alarmist. And if CNN puts it out, then the other side's going to be saying it's alarmist or whatever. You know, it's just, you can't win.
That's true. Yeah, that's just the sad reality we live in today. So do you think if we didn't have the polarization, I guess this is just a hypothetical question, but if we didn't have the polarization of the two political parties that we do today, do you think coverage of coronavirus would be the way it is? Or do you think it would be different?
Do you mean like the handling of coronavirus, or do you mean like the media coverage of it?
I guess both.
I would say yes to both for sure. I think if we had I would say right now our government is at best dysfunctional. And I mean that, you know, just primarily at the federal level, but also at many of the state levels too, and local levels. But yeah, I mean, I definitely think it would have been handled much better, much more efficiently, and much more professionally than it has been. And from a media perspective, I think as a result of it being handled better, you know, I think the coverage wouldn't have been quite as sensationalized as it has been. I I mean, the media always tends to sensationalize things, whether intentionally or unintentionally. But, I think the politics definitely kind of is at the root of everything that's happening with it.
Okay, I agree. So for one last question, I want to ask, how do you feel about the future? Do you feel positive that things will get better? Do you feel neutral? Or even do you feel negative about it? Do you think things will just get worse?
Go first.
I feel like it changes day to day how I would answer this question. Right now, we're in a particularly low point just because of everything building up over the past few months. And like you said, every month you think next month you'll know more, and you don't. So I'm feeling rather pessimistic right now. I think eventually things will get better, but what does eventually mean? I don't know. It could be 5 years. I don't know at this point. I'm done putting timetables on things because all of my timetables have been wrong. In the beginning, I thought Story was going to be able to go back to her play school in May. Of course, I laugh at that now. Yeah, I mean, I think I'm particularly pessimistic just because of our situation as far as his work. I feel like it's quite possibly the worst, occupation that you could have in this situation because, like you said, even if in January things start to open back up, are all states going to be open or only some states? And are they going to be at full capacity or half capacity? Other people's jobs, it's either you're there or you're not. There are so many variables with, his situation that I tend to be more on the pessimistic side. So my hope is he'll go back to work in January, but you can't plan a tour and pay for all the expenses of a tour bus and gas and everything to jump from, one arena over here that's open to that one and, only having half capacity. That's not going to pay, these guys. So, right now, honestly, I don't have many hopes for the next 6 months. But I hope I'm wrong. And I do think that things will get better long term. Again, with the election coming up, I mean, that's going to be a huge decider too on how we go forward from here. So again, we're just on hold. I mean, that's been the most painful thing for me is feeling like my life is on pause on so many different levels, and not being able to plan for the future because I'm an obsessive planner and I've had to let that go. Yeah. So we'll see.
Yeah. Sorry, go ahead.
Oh, I just wanted to ask really quickly, how has that impacted your mental health? Like being this planning type A person and just having to let that go.
I mean, it's like he said, you got to take it a day at a time. It's been hard. I actually have an anxiety disorder, and part of that is a social anxiety disorder. So kind of in the beginning, I thought, okay, I'll be able to handle this because I don't mind being at home alone. But my anxiety is the worst it's ever been right now, just because I don't have a plan. I don't know what's going to happen. Again, with our house, with his job, with my job, do I need to go back to work? If he can't work, how am I going to homeschool my child? I mean, I'm sure everybody's dealing with this, but it's like so many different levels of uncertainty. It's debilitating, so every morning it's hard to get out of bed. I'm just thankful that I have him and my daughter to get me through because it's been really hard. And then of course I'm leaving out the part where he was in the hospital and nearly died, which was the worst week of my life, obviously. So yeah, it's been hard. I wish I could say something more positive, but this is pretty much, the lowest point of the 6 months. Cause at least, back in March, April, I had some hope that there was, a light at the end of the tunnel. And now I'm starting to feel like we're never going to get out of this, but I know we will eventually. It's just going to take more time than I originally thought. So
it's going to take more time than it should have, I think.
Yeah.
And what about you, Craig?
Well, just for starters, just to piggyback onto what she was talking about, like the touring coming back, like that's one of the things that a lot of people who aren't in the music industry don't understand is they think it's just a switch you turn on and off. And it's like, it's not that simple because like the band that I tour with, we tour by tour bus, and there's 7 people in the band. We have 5 crew members. And so there's a lot of moving pieces, there's a lot of logistics, and there's a lot of expenses that go along with that. And when you book a tour, you book a tour routing, which is you're basically traveling from city to city, and you obviously can only travel so far in a given period. And generally, like the schedule we typically do is we play 4 or 5 shows and then have a couple days off.
Okay.
And those couple days off, so depending on the routing, like if we have to make a big jump in distance, they'll schedule that'll happen on those days off.
Oh.
But like, that's not every time. And then sometimes we don't have to go far between, the last show before the day's off and the next show. So we'll just end up hanging out in the same place for a couple days. But the point being is that like she said, let's say January 1st, it's like, all right, let's get back to touring. But, Georgia might be allowing live music performances, but then South Carolina maybe isn't. So now instead of doing a normal routing where maybe we go through like, Atlanta up into like Charleston and then on to like North Carolina, like Asheville, now we have to go straight to Asheville. And I'm just picking these cities out, out of the blue. I don't know what the distances are. That Atlanta to Asheville is obviously something we could probably do easily in 2 days. But the point being is it's not going to be as simple as it used to be. It's like, it's going to make the tour routing a lot more difficult.
Okay.
Which means we're going to go on tour instead of being able to go out on like a 2.5 week tour and play, 12 shows or 13 shows. We might only be able to go out for 10 days and play 7 shows or something, or 6 shows, so it's definitely going to be bumpy when things get back to normal, unless some magic wand happens and everything just happens to go away, which I really don't think is going to happen, but it's 2020, so anything's possible.
It's true.
But in terms of just looking towards the future, I mean, I'm kind of with what Dewin said. I mean, I think long-term things will obviously get better. I hate to keep coming back to it, but I feel like right now the political divides in this country are really the driving factor behind all of everything that we're experiencing right now. Again, if we had a more unified government, I think this pandemic would have been, a way more palatable than it has been for everybody. I think it would have been, not nearly this invasive and bumpy. And, getting past the pandemic again and past the election, I mean, it's going to continue to be rough here until things can kind of settle down and everybody can, we can finally get some adults in the room and, people can start to focus on each other instead of these kind of made up, my team's better than your team dynamics of politics and all this stuff. So again, I think short term we're in for a bumpy ride still for a while, but I'm fairly confident that down the road things will turn around.
Okay. That's more of a positive outlook, so that's good.
Yeah.
Is there anything else you'd like to say? Any closing comments?
I don't think so.
Nothing I can really think of.
Thank you for doing this.
Yeah,
I think it's
thank you.
awesome that you guys are doing these.
Thank you for allowing me to interview you. You guys are awesome. Well, I hope you guys do really well soon. I don't know how else to say it. I just hope things get better for everybody. But
Yeah.
I hope you guys truly are immune to the coronavirus for a while. I think you deserve that.
Thanks. Me too.
And good luck with schooling.
Thank
I
you.
hope your daughter's doing well also. What's her name is Story?
Yes.
I hope she's doing well. And I hope we all can go back to work and to school normally at some point.
Yes, me too. I hope band goes okay.
Yeah, have fun with your
masks.
Your woodwind. What instrument do you play?
I play oboe.
Oh, right on. Well, have fun with your oboe mask.
We have to put masks on if we have several measures of rest, so I just like hang it on my ear if I have like 8 measures of rest, and then I put it back on.
a great idea.
It's funny. I'm like, again, I'm all about the mask use, but stuff like that, I kind of have to laugh at a little bit because I'm like, all right, look, like, I don't know. Again, I get it. I think a lot of that kind of stuff comes back to liability. And some lawyer somewhere is like enforcing that because they don't.
Oh yeah, UF is going to take no blame for this. They're going to say it was the student's fault, even if we're doing everything right. But we're going to try our best.
Yeah, that's all you can do.
Yeah. And I encourage you to listen to our live stream. It'll be out sometime later this year. It's not the same as a live audience, but you know, I think classical music live streams might be better because we're not used to audiences like screaming and clapping while we're playing anyway.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And that's, again, like, that's why I was saying earlier, like, you know, certain styles and certain like settings, or I should say like groups or whatever, I think translate better on the live stream virtual thing than others do. And like the band that we play with, that I tour with, it's very high energy. The lead singer, the front man of the group, the namesake of the group, like he is very engaging. He's a storyteller. He talks to the audience. He's very engaged with the audience, and we all feed off the audience energy when we play. So for us to try and do a performance, we absolutely could, but it would have a completely different dynamic to it. It'd be much more sterile than like a normal live show. And so, yeah, to your point, like I definitely like could see like a classical performance being live streamed, being something that would be far less unusual feeling, awkward feeling, you know, just because of the interactions, like you said, or lack of interaction.
No one would clap between movements. Yeah. I think it might be nice even.
Actually, it could be kind of funny though too, like seeing like people's comments going up the screen, like while the thing was going on. That could add a whole new dynamic to it though. That could be pretty entertaining. Like
that oboe solo sucked.
Yeah. Like the bass drummer just dropped his mallet. Ha ha ha. LOL.
Cymbal crashed at the wrong time.
Right.
Happening. Okay, so, well, thank you so much. I hope you have a great rest of your day.
Thank you, you too.
Well, thank you so much. I'm going to stop the recording. Have a great day, guys.
Thank you too.
Thanks.
Bye.
Bye. Good luck.
Thank you.